A hungry immigrant boy in New York City steals food to survive, but accidentally bumps into an arrogant man's car. The man cruelly humiliates the child, forcing him to clean his shoes and kiss his feet. A millionaire businessman witnesses this shocking scene and decides to intervene, changing the boy's life forever and teaching the cruel man an unforgettable lesson about empathy. What happens next is even more astonishing. Leave a like to keep following the upcoming videos, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more incredible stories like this one. The streets of New York City were unforgiving, especially for a 10-year-old boy like Matteo. He had arrived in the city just a few months ago with his mother, fleeing poverty and violence in their home country. But the American dream they had hoped for seemed more like a nightmare now. His mother worked long hours at multiple jobs, barely making enough to keep a roof over their heads. Food was scarce, and Matteo often went to bed with an empty stomach. On this particular day, the gnawing pain in his belly was too much to bear. Matteo knew it was wrong, but desperation drove him to do something he never thought he would: steal. He had been watching a street vendor selling hot dogs for hours, waiting for the right moment. When the vendor turned to serve another customer, Matteo saw his chance. His heart pounding, he darted forward and grabbed a hot dog from the cart. But as he turned to run, he collided hard with something solid. Matteo fell backward, the stolen food flying from his grasp. He looked up in horror to see that he had run straight into the side of a shiny black Mercedes. "What the hell?" A sharp voice cut through the air. A tall man, in an expensive suit, stepped out of the car, his face contorted with rage. "You little rat! Look what you've done to my car!" Matteo scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "Shut up!" The man grabbed Matteo by the collar, shaking him roughly. "Do you have any idea how much this car costs? More than your miserable life is worth." A crowd had begun to gather, watching the scene unfold. Matteo felt tears welling up in his eyes, but he fought to hold them back. He wouldn't give this man the satisfaction of seeing him cry. "Please, sir," Matteo pleaded. "It was an accident. I'll clean it, I promise." The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Clean it? With what, those filthy rags you're wearing?" He looked around at the crowd, playing to his audience. "You want to make it up to me, boy? Fine. Get down on your knees and clean my shoes with your tongue." Matteo felt his stomach drop. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but the man's grip on his collar tightened, and he knew he had no choice. Slowly, feeling as if his legs were made of lead, Matteo sank to his knees. The crowd murmured, some in disgust at the man's cruelty, others laughing at Matteo's humiliation. The boy leaned forward, his face burning with shame, and stuck out his tongue. "That's right, you little thief," the man sneered. "Lick them clean. And when you're done, you're going to kiss my feet and beg for forgiveness." Matteo's tongue touched the polished leather of the man's expensive shoes. He wanted to vomit, to run away, to disappear. But he knew that if he didn't do as he was told, things would only get worse. As he worked his way across the shoe, tasting the dirt and grime, Matteo heard a commotion in the crowd. A new voice, deep and authoritative, cut through the jeers and whispers. "That's enough." Matteo dared to look up. A well-dressed man in his 50s had pushed through the crowd. His eyes, a startling blue, were fixed on the cruel man with a look of disgust. "Who the hell are you?" the cruel man demanded. "Someone who doesn't stand by while a child is abused?" The newcomer replied coldly. He turned to Matteo, his voice softening. "Stand up, son. You don't have to do this." Matteo hesitated, looking between the two men. The cruel one still had a grip on his collar, but it had loosened in surprise at the interruption. "I said stand up," the newcomer repeated, more firmly this time. There was something in his voice, a quiet authority that made Matteo obey almost instinctively. As Matteo got to his feet, the cruel man seemed to regain his composure. "This is none of your business, old man. This little thief ran into my car. He's getting what he deserves." The newcomer's eyes flashed dangerously. what he deserves. He's a child, a hungry child by the looks of it, and you're a grown man terrorizing him for an accident. If anyone deserves punishment here, it's you." The cruel man laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Do you know who I am?" "I don't care if you're the mayor of New York," the newcomer replied. "What you're doing is wrong, and it stops now." He turned to the crowd. "Did anyone here see what happened?" A few people nodded, and one woman stepped forward. "The boy accidentally ran into the car when he took something from the hot dog stand." The newcomer nodded, then turned back to the cruel man. "So, it was an accident, and instead of showing compassion to a hungry child, you decided to humiliate him. What does that say about you?" The cruel man's face had turned an ugly shade of red. He released Matteo's collar and took a step towards the newcomer. "Listen, you self-righteous prick." But before he could finish, the newcomer had pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. We'll let them sort this out. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about how you forced a minor to perform degrading acts in public." The color drained from the cruel man's face. He looked around wildly, suddenly aware of the dozens of witnesses, many with their phones out, recording the scene. Without another word, he turned and practically dove back into his Mercedes, peeling away from the curb with a screech of tires. As the crowd began to disperse, the newcomer turned his attention to Matteo. The boy stood there shaking, unsure of what would happen next. But when the man spoke, his voice was kind. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, kneeling down to Matteo's level. Matteo nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The events of the last few minutes felt like a blur. "My name is Jack," the man said, "and what's yours?" Matteo," the boy stammered. Jack smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made Matteo feel safe for the first time in a long while. "Matteo, that's a good name. Are you hungry, Matteo?" At the mention of food, Matteo's stomach growled loudly. Jack chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes. Come on, let's get you something to eat." As they walked towards a nearby diner, Matteo couldn't help but wonder if this was all a dream. How had this day gone from one of the worst in his life to this? He glanced up at Jack, who was guiding him gently with a hand on his shoulder. "Sir?" Matteo said hesitantly. Why did you help me?" Jack looked down at him, his eyes serious. "Because it was the right thing to do, Matteo, and because a long time ago someone helped me when I needed it most. Sometimes all it takes to change a life is one act of kindness." They entered the diner, the smell of food making Matteo's mouth water. As they settled into a booth, Jack studied the boy's face. "Now, why don't you tell me your story? And don't worry, we'll order while you talk. I have a feeling it might be a long one." As Matteo began to speak, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time since coming to this strange, overwhelming city, he felt like someone was truly listening to him. He didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment, sitting across from this kind stranger in a warm diner with the promise of a full meal, Matteo allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Little did he know, this chance encounter was about to change not just his life, but the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have imagined. As Matteo devoured the burger and fries Jack had ordered for him, he couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Life on the streets of New York had taught him that kindness often came with a price. Between mouthfuls, he glanced up at Jack, who was watching him with a gentle smile. "Slow down, Matteo," Jack chuckled. "The food's not going anywhere." Matteo nodded, forcing himself to eat more slowly. As his hunger subsided, the reality of his situation began to sink in. What would happen when this meal was over? Would Jack turn him over to the police, to child services? The thought made his stomach churn. "So," Jack said, leaning back in the booth, "tell me about your mother. You mentioned she works long hours?" Matteo swallowed hard, torn between his instinct to protect his family's privacy and his desire to trust this man who had shown him such kindness. She works 3 jobs, he said finally. cleaning offices at night, washing dishes at a restaurant in the morning, and taking care of old people in the afternoon. Jack's eyebrows rose. That's a lot for one person to handle. And what about you? Do you go to school? Matteo looked down at his plate, shame coloring his cheeks. I'm supposed to, but Mama needs help with the rent, so I try to find ways to make money. Like stealing hot dogs? Jack's voice was gentle, without judgment. Matteo's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to, but we hadn't eaten in 2 days, and I was so hungry. Jack reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Matteo's arm. It's okay, son. I understand. Life can be incredibly tough sometimes, especially when you're trying to start over in a new country. Matteo looked up, surprised. How did you know we're not from here? Jack smiled. I recognize the look. I've seen it many times before. In fact, I saw it in the mirror every day when I was about your age. For the next hour, Jack shared his own story with Matteo. He had come to America as a child, fleeing war in his home country. Like Matteo, he had struggled with poverty, hunger, and the constant fear of deportation. But a chance encounter with a kind teacher had changed the course of his life. She saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself, Jack explained. She helped me get into a good school, taught me to believe in myself. And now, well, he gestured around the diner. Now I own this place, and a few others like it around the city. Matteo's eyes widened. You own this? But I thought, you look so... Jack laughed. Rich? Well, I've done all right for myself, but I never forget where I came from. That's why I try to help when I can. Speaking of which, he leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Matteo, I'd like to help you and your mother if you'll let me. Matteo felt a flutter of hope in his chest, quickly followed by suspicion. Why? What do you want from us? Nothing, Jack said firmly, except maybe the chance to make a difference, like someone once did for me. Before Matteo could respond, the door of the diner burst open. A woman rushed in, her eyes wild with panic. Matteo! She cried, spotting the boy in the booth. Mama! Matteo jumped up, confused and alarmed. How did you... His mother engulfed him in a tight hug, then pulled back, her hands frantically checking him for injuries. Are you hurt? Did they hurt you? Oh, my baby. I'm okay, Mama, Matteo assured her, though he was still bewildered by her sudden appearance. But how did you know I was here? His mother's eyes flashed with anger. It's all over the internet. You, being forced to... She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice choked with emotion. Jack stood up, extending his hand to Matteo's mother. Ma'am, I'm Jack Thompson. I brought Matteo here after that unfortunate incident. I assure you, he's safe. Matteo's mother regarded Jack warily, not taking his offered hand. And who are you? Why did you bring my son here instead of calling me or the police? Mama, he helped me, Matteo interjected. He made the bad man go away and bought me food. His mother's expression softened slightly, but she still looked uncertain. Jack gestured for her to sit. Please join us. I think we have a lot to talk about. Over the next hour, Jack listened as Matteo and his mother, whose name was Elena, shared their story. They had come to America 6 months ago, fleeing gang violence in their home country. Elena's husband, Matteo's father, had been killed by the gangs, leaving them with no choice but to run. We thought America would be safe, Elena said, wiping away tears. But it's so hard here. Everything is so expensive, and the work, it never ends. Jack nodded sympathetically. I understand. I've been where you are, but I want to help if you'll let me. Elena's eyes narrowed. Help how? We don't take charity. It's not charity, Jack assured her. It's an investment, in Matteo's future and in yours. He laid out his proposal. He would help Elena find a better-paying job with more reasonable hours. He would ensure Matteo could attend a good school, and he would provide them with a small apartment in one of his buildings, at a rent they could afford. In return, Jack said, all I ask is that you work hard, study hard, and someday when you're able, pay it forward by helping someone else in need. Elena and Matteo sat in stunned silence. It seemed too good to be true. "Why?" Elena finally asked. "Why would you do this for us?" Jack's eyes grew distant, as if looking into the past. "Because 30 years ago I was Matteo, hungry, scared, alone in a new country. Someone gave me a chance, and it changed my life. Now it's my turn to do the same." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt a glimmer of hope. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Jack smiled. "Let me help you build the life you came here for." Elena looked at Matteo, saw the hope shining in his eyes, and made her decision. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes, we accept." As they left the diner that evening, Matteo felt as if he were walking on air. In the span of a few hours, his world had been turned upside down. From the depths of humiliation and despair, he had found hope and a chance at a better life. But as they reached the street, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. The window rolled down, revealing the sneering face of the man who had humiliated Matteo earlier. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Isn't this a touching scene? The little thief and his family being saved by a do-gooder." Jack stepped forward, placing himself between the car and Matteo's family. "I thought I made myself clear earlier. Leave the boy alone." The man's sneer deepened. "Oh, I'm not here for the boy. I'm here for you, Mr. Thompson. You see, I've done some research since our little encounter, and I think you'll find that crossing me was a very, very big mistake." With that ominous warning, the window rolled up, and the car sped away into the night, leaving Matteo, Elena, and Jack standing on the sidewalk, the joy of their earlier agreement now overshadowed by a sense of looming danger. As they watched the car disappear around a corner, Jack's phone buzzed with a message. He looked at it, his face paling slightly. "I'm afraid our troubles might just be beginning," he said quietly. Matteo felt a chill run down his spine. What had his chance encounter set in motion, and would the promise of a better life be snatched away before it could even begin? The following days were a whirlwind for Matteo and Elena. True to his word, Jack had set things in motion quickly. They moved into a small but clean apartment in one of Jack's buildings, a far cry from the cramped, run-down room they'd been renting before. Matteo was enrolled in a nearby school, and Elena started training for a new job as a receptionist at one of Jack's businesses. But even as their circumstances improved, a shadow loomed over their newfound happiness. Jack had been tight-lipped about the message he'd received that night, but Matteo could see the worry lines etched on his face whenever he thought no one was looking. One afternoon, about a week after their life-changing encounter, Matteo returned from school to find Jack and Elena in deep conversation at the kitchen table. They fell silent as soon as he entered, exchanging a look that made Matteo's stomach churn with anxiety. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice small. Elena forced a smile. "Nothing, mijo. How was school?" But Matteo wasn't fooled. He'd spent too long reading people's expressions, looking for signs of danger on the streets. "Please don't lie to me," he said, his voice stronger now. "I know something's wrong." Jack sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're right, Matteo. Come, sit down. You deserve to know what's happening." As Matteo took a seat, Jack began to explain. The man who had humiliated Matteo that day was named Victor Reeves, a powerful businessman with connections in both legitimate and illicit industries. He had a reputation for ruthlessness and never forgetting a slight. "He's been digging into my past," Jack said, his voice heavy, "trying to find something he can use against me, and he might have found something." Elena reached out, placing a comforting hand on Jack's arm. "What is it? What could be so bad?" Jack's eyes met Matteo's, and the boy saw a flicker of fear there that made his blood run cold. "When I first came to this country," Jack began, "I was desperate, alone, scared. I did things I'm not proud of to survive." He took a deep breath before continuing. I worked for some bad people, carried messages, kept watch during deals. I was just a kid, but I knew it was wrong. When I got the chance to get out, I took it and never looked back. Matteo felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was shocked to learn that Jack, who had seemed so perfect, had a dark past. But on the other, he felt a connection to the man's struggle that he hadn't before. "But that was so long ago," Elena protested. "Surely they can't hold that against you now." Jack shook his head. "In the eyes of the law, maybe not. But Reeves doesn't care about the law. He cares about power and revenge. If he exposes my past, it could ruin everything I've built. My businesses, my reputation, all of it could come crashing down." Matteo felt a surge of anger. "But that's not fair. You've changed. You help people now." "Life isn't always fair, Matteo," Jack said with a sad smile. "But you're right. I have changed. And that's why I'm not going to let Reeves win." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I'm going to fight back, not with violence or threats, but with the truth. I'm going to tell my story, all of it, before Reeves can twist it. And I'm going to need your help." Elena looked uncertain. "Our help? But what can we do?" "You're living proof of what I'm trying to do now," Jack explained. "Of how I'm trying to make up for my past by helping others. Your story, combined with mine, could be powerful." Matteo nodded eagerly, but Elena hesitated. "I don't know, Jack. We're grateful for everything you've done, but going public, putting ourselves out there like that, it could be dangerous." Jack understood her fears. "I know it's asking a lot, and I won't force you to do anything you're not comfortable with, but think about it, please. Together, we might be able to turn this around." As they discussed the possibilities, none of them noticed the sleek black car parked across the street or the man inside taking photos with a long-range lens. The next morning, Matteo woke to the sound of urgent voices in the living room. He crept out of bed and pressed his ear to the door. "They can't do this," Elena was saying, her voice choked with emotion. "It's not right." "I know," Jack replied, his tone grim. "But they have. And we need to act fast." Matteo couldn't stand it anymore. He burst out of his room. "What's happened?" he demanded. Jack and Elena turned to him, their faces etched with worry. Jack was holding a newspaper, which he reluctantly handed to Matteo. The front page bore a large photo of Jack, Elena, and Matteo outside their new apartment. The headline read, "Philanthropist's Dark Secret. Jack Thompson's criminal past exposed." Matteo's hand shook as he read the article. It detailed Jack's childhood involvement with criminal gangs, twisting the facts to make it seem as though he was still connected to the underworld. Worse, it insinuated that his current philanthropic efforts, including helping Matteo and Elena, were just a cover for more sinister activities. "They're saying I'm using you," Jack said, his voice thick with disgust, "that I'm exploiting immigrants for... God, I can't even say it." Elena was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do? Will they take Matteo away? Will they deport us?" Jack shook his head firmly. "No, I won't let that happen, but we need to move quickly. The press will be here soon, and we need to be ready." As if on cue, they heard a commotion outside. Matteo ran to the window and peeked out. The street was filling with news vans and reporters, all clamoring for a statement. "We should run," Elena said, already moving to gather their few belongings. "We can't stay here." But Jack stood firm. "No, running will only make us look guilty. We're going to face this head-on, together." Matteo looked between Jack and his mother, torn between fear and a desire to fight back. "What can I do?" he asked. Jack knelt down to Matteo's level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "You've already done so much, Matteo. You brought us together. You showed me that I could still make a difference. Now I need you to be brave one more time. Can you do that?" Matteo swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, I can be brave." Jack smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Good, because we're about to tell our story to the world. The real story." As they prepared to face the media frenzy outside, Matteo felt a mix of fear and determination. He didn't fully understand the complexities of the situation, but he knew one thing for certain. Jack had given him and his mother a chance, at a better life. Now it was their turn to stand by him. Little did they know, Victor Reeves was watching the scene unfold from his office across town, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Let's see how your precious reputation holds up now, Thompson," he muttered, reaching for his phone to set the next phase of his plan in motion. As Jack opened the door to face the sea of reporters, Mateo took a deep breath. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But the challenges ahead were far greater than any of them could have imagined, and the true test of their newfound bond was only just beginning. The moment Jack opened the door, they were assaulted by a barrage of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Mateo instinctively shrank back, but Jack's steady hand on his shoulder gave him courage. Elena stood on his other side, her face a mask of determination despite the fear in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, is it true that you have ties to organized crime? Are you exploiting immigrants for illegal activities? What do you have to say about your criminal past?" The questions came rapid fire, each more accusatory than the last. Jack raised his hands, calling for silence. To Mateo's surprise, the clamor died down. There was something in Jack's demeanor, a quiet authority that commanded respect even in this chaos. "I know you all have questions," Jack began, his voice clear and steady. "And I'm here to answer them. But first, I want to introduce you to Mateo and Elena. They are not props or pawns in some grand scheme. They are real people with a real story, and I think it's time you heard it." Jack nodded to Elena, who stepped forward. Her voice shook slightly as she began to speak, but grew stronger with each word. She told their story, the violence they had fled, the hardships they had faced in America, and how a chance encounter with Jack had changed everything. As Elena spoke, Mateo watched the reporters' faces. He saw skepticism turn to interest, and in some cases, to sympathy. When Elena finished, Jack took over, addressing the allegations against him head-on. "Yes, I have a past," he admitted. "As a scared, desperate child in a new country, I made mistakes. I fell in with the wrong crowd. But I was given a second chance, and I've spent every day since then trying to make the most of it, to give back, to help others who are where I once was." He went on to detail his journey from troubled youth to successful businessman and philanthropist. He spoke of the hundreds of people he had helped over the years, not just Mateo and Elena. As Jack talked, Mateo noticed movement at the back of the crowd. A sleek black car had pulled up, and a familiar figure was emerging. Victor Reeves had arrived, his face twisted in a sneer as he pushed his way towards the front. "Touching story, Thompson," Reeves called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But do you really expect anyone to believe this act? Once a criminal, always a criminal." Jack's eyes hardened as he met Reeves's gaze. "This is no act, Victor. This is the truth, something you might not recognize." Reeves laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Truth? Let's talk about truth. Tell them about the deals you made, the people you hurt. Tell them about the blood on your hands." A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to Jack, waiting for his response. Mateo felt his heart racing. What if Reeves was right? What if there was more to Jack's past than he had admitted? But Jack didn't falter. "You're right, Victor. There is blood on my hands. The blood of the child I once was, scared and alone, making choices no child should have to make. The weight of those choices has driven me every day since to be better. To do better." He turned back to the reporters. "I'm not here to deny my past or make excuses. I'm here to show you what can happen when someone is given a second chance, when we choose compassion over condemnation." As Jack spoke, Mateo saw something he never expected, tears in the eyes of hardened reporters. Even some of Reeves' own entourage looked moved. But Reeves wasn't done. With a snarl, he pushed forward, grabbing Jack by the collar. "You think you can talk your way out of this? I'll destroy you, Thompson. I'll take everything you've built." What happened next would be replayed on news channels for days to come. As Reeves raised his fist, Mateo darted forward. Without thinking, he placed himself between Jack and Reeves. "Stop!" Mateo cried, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Mr. Jack is a good man. He helped us when no one else would. If you want to hurt him, you'll have to go through me first." The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed frantically, capturing the image of a small boy standing defiantly against a grown man. Reeves froze, his fist still raised, shock written across his face. In that moment of hesitation, two things happened simultaneously. Eleanor rushed forward, pulling Mateo back to safety, and the police, who had been watching the situation unfold, moved in to restrain Reeves. As Reeves was led away, shouting threats and obscenities, Jack knelt down next to Mateo. "That was incredibly brave," he said softly, "but also very dangerous. Promise me you won't put yourself at risk like that again." Mateo nodded, still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "I promise, but I couldn't let him hurt you, not after everything you've done for us." Jack pulled Mateo into a tight hug, and Elena joined them. For a moment they stood there, a small island of calm in the sea of chaos around them. When they finally broke apart, they found the mood of the crowd had shifted dramatically. The aggressive questioning had given way to a more sympathetic tone. Reporters were asking about Jack's charitable work, about his plans for the future, about how others could help immigrants like Mateo and Elena. As they answered questions, Mateo began to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had turned the tide, but their ordeal was far from over. As the crowd began to disperse, Jack's phone rang. His face grew grave as he listened to the caller. "What is it?" Elena asked when he hung up. Jack's voice was heavy as he replied, "That was my lawyer. Reeves has filed a lawsuit against me. He's claiming that I'm using my businesses as a front for illegal activities and that I'm exploiting immigrants like you for personal gain." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "But that's not true. We can fight this, can't we?" Jack nodded slowly. "We can, and we will. But it's going to be a tough battle. Reeves has money and influence. He won't give up easily." Mateo looked up at Jack, seeing the worry etched on his face. "What can we do?" he asked. Jack managed a small smile. "We keep telling our story. We show the world the truth, and we stick together no matter what." As they made their way back inside, away from the prying eyes of the media, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come, and it would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. That night, as Mateo lay in bed, unable to sleep, he heard muffled voices from the living room. He crept to his door and listened. "You might have to testify," Jack was saying. "All of us. Are you prepared for that?" "We'll do whatever it takes," Elena replied firmly. "You've given us so much, Jack. We won't abandon you now." There was a pause, then Jack spoke again, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to drag you into all this." "You didn't drag us into anything," Elena said softly. "You saved us, and now we'll help save you." As Mateo crawled back into bed, his mind was racing. Testify? In court? The thought terrified him. But he knew with a certainty that surprised him that he would do it for Jack, for his mother, for the chance at a better life that they had been given. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But as Mateo drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the nagging fear that their troubles were far from over. In fact, the worst might be yet to come. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Jack's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, worked tirelessly to build their defense. Mateo and Elena found themselves in long meetings, recounting their story over and over again. Each time, Mateo felt the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. He knew that their words could make or break Jack's case. As the trial approached, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters camped outside their apartment building, hoping for a glimpse or a quote. Jack had hired security to keep them at bay, but Mateo still felt like a prisoner in his own home. One evening, about a week before the trial was set to begin, Mateo overheard a heated conversation between Jack and Sarah. "We need more, Jack," Sarah was saying, her voice tense. "Reeves' legal team is ruthless. They're going to try to paint you as a manipulator, using Mateo and Elena for your own gain." "But that's not true," Jack protested. "I know that, and you know that. But we need to prove it to the jury." There was a long pause before Jack spoke again. "There might be a way, but it's risky, very risky." Matteo leaned closer to the door, straining to hear. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. "I have documents from my past. They prove my connection to the gang I was involved with as a kid, but they also implicate some very powerful people who would do anything to keep this information buried." Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the door. "Jack, that's incredibly dangerous. Are you sure?" "No," Jack admitted, "but it might be our only chance. I've spent years trying to make up for my past. I can't let Reeves destroy everything now." Matteo's mind was reeling. More secrets? More danger? He wanted to burst into the room, to tell Jack not to risk himself any further. But before he could move, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his mother, her eyes sad but understanding. "Come, mijo," she said softly. "This is not for us to hear." As they walked back to their room, Matteo couldn't contain his worries any longer. "Mama, what if Jack gets hurt because of us? What if Reeves wins?" Elena knelt down, looking her son in the eye. "Listen to me, Matteo. Jack is fighting for what's right, and so are we. Whatever happens, we must be brave. Can you do that?" Matteo nodded, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. "I'll try, Mama." The day of the trial arrived with a sense of foreboding. The courthouse was surrounded by a sea of reporters and spectators. As they made their way inside, Matteo caught sight of Reeves, flanked by a team of expensive-looking lawyers. The man's eyes were cold as they locked onto Matteo, and the boy felt a shiver run down his spine. The trial was grueling. Reeves's lawyers painted Jack as a cunning criminal, using his philanthropy as a cover for illegal activities. They portrayed Matteo and Elena as unwitting pawns in his scheme. Matteo watched as Jack sat stoically through it all, his face a mask of calm even as the accusations flew. When it was their turn to testify, Matteo felt his heart pounding. But as he took the stand and began to speak, he found strength he didn't know he had. He told their story, not just the parts about Jack, but about their life before, about the hardships they had faced, and about the hope Jack had given them. "Mr. Jack didn't just help us," Matteo said, his voice growing stronger. "He showed us that we could have a future here, that we mattered." As he spoke, Matteo saw something change in the eyes of the jury. The skepticism began to fade, replaced by something that looked like understanding. But Reeves's team wasn't done. They brought forward witnesses who claimed to have seen Jack engaged in shady dealings. They presented financial records that, taken out of context, seemed to support their claims of illegal activities. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, Jack made his move. He took the stand and, to everyone's shock, admitted to his past involvement with the gang. "Yes, I made mistakes," he said, his voice steady. "I was a scared kid, alone in a new country, doing whatever I could to survive. But I got out, I turned my life around, and I've spent every day since then trying to help others do the same." Then, in a moment that would be replayed on news channels for weeks to come, Jack produced the documents he had spoken about to Sarah. He laid bare not just his own past, but the corruption that had allowed gangs, like the one he had been involved with, to thrive. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reeves' face turned an alarming shade of red as he realized the implications of what Jack was revealing. Some of his own associates began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. As the judge called for order, Matteo caught Jack's eye. The man gave him a small, tired smile, and Matteo understood the enormity of what he had just done. Jack had risked everything, his reputation, his safety, maybe even his life, to tell the truth. The deliberation seemed to take forever. Matteo, Elena, and Jack sat in tense silence, waiting for the verdict that would determine their future. When the jury finally returned, Matteo held his breath. "We find the defendant, Jack Thompson, not guilty of all charges." The courtroom erupted once again, this time in a mix of cheers and angry shouts. Matteo felt tears of relief streaming down his face as he hugged his mother tightly. They had won, but their ordeal wasn't quite over. As they left the courthouse, flanked by security, Jack pulled Matteo and Elena aside. "Listen," he said urgently. "What I revealed in there, it's put us all in danger. We need to disappear for a while. I have a safe house prepared. Will you come with me?" Matteo looked at his mother, seeing his own mix of fear and trust reflected in her eyes. They both nodded. That night, under the cover of darkness, they slipped away. As they drove out of the city, leaving behind everything they had known, Matteo felt a strange mix of emotions: fear of the unknown future, sadness for the life they were leaving behind, but also a sense of excitement and hope. He looked at Jack, who was focused on the road ahead, and then at his mother, who gave him a reassuring smile. They had been through so much together, and there were undoubtedly more challenges to come. But Matteo knew that whatever happened, they would face it as a family. As the city lights faded behind them and the open road stretched out ahead, Matteo realized something profound. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't the tiny apartment they had left behind, or even the country they had fled. Home was here, in this car, with these people who had fought so hard for each other. Jack caught Matteo's eye in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there, buddy?" Matteo nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, I'm okay. We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Jack's eyes crinkled with a smile of his own. "Yeah, Matteo, we're going to be just fine." As they drove into the night, towards an uncertain but hopeful future, Matteo felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way, together. The road ahead was long and unknown, but for the first time in his young life, Matteo wasn't afraid of the journey. He had found his home, his family, in the most unexpected of places, and that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all.